Over 63 countries on the planet still permit hunting, or call it hunting tourism, or even call it trophy hunting as we know it today. A quarter of these are on the African continent, and Uganda is not an exception. For the average human, movies like The Lion King have made us fall so deeply in love with these wildlife species. So deeply in love that without a second thought, we'll go ahead and sign every other petition to save Simba. And I know many of you listening in would join campaigns to put an end to what former British Premier Boris Johnson calls a barbaric activity. But in the countries where it's being carried out, those in support of this highly invoiced activity say it comes loaded with cash. And this comes with benefits both towards direct wildlife conservation as well as offering socio-economic benefits for the communities living around these hunting areas. For the hunting community, their pertinent argument hinges on a century-old practice, but also on the notion that if it pays, it stays. On the other side of the table, those against hunting tourism, or trophy hunting as we've called it, continue to advocate for tighter restrictions and also continue to lobby for a complete ban. They largely approach this debate from a position of animal welfare, science, and they advocate more for a form of tourism that, as they say, is less cruel. And for them, this form of less cruel tourism will eventually pay if it stays. Well, this week, I leave all my emotions behind and I'm very privileged to moderate a conversation around this controversial topic. Is hunting really a feasible model of conservation? Joining me all the way from Sweden is an expert hunter and outspoken writer who's published numerous pieces and articles in leading magazines around the world on this delicate topic of hunting. But he's also contributed to many similar debates on various fora since 1992. Now, quite strangely, I repeatedly refer to him as Jens in the podcast, but the right pronunciation, I believe, is Jens Ulrik. Jens joins the podcast to explain to us the position of the hunting community. And then, on the other side, I'm joined by the Africa wildlife specialist at the Humane Society International, one of the world's top and most respected animal welfare organizations. HSI works day and night for the betterment of animals, whether be it animals on farms or the remarkable wildlife that roams the African plains. And representing HSI this week will be Dr. Matthew Schurch. Dr. Matthew will be joining me from South Africa to give us an expert opinion on why a future without hunting is indeed a brighter and better future for the planet's most iconic but also largely threatened species. And here's a bit of what you can expect. Jens a little bit and really ask, if I could call it a personal question, and maybe I'm just taking a peek into the life or call it the heart of a hunter. When you shoot these animals, would you say you love them?
Absolutely. I have always loved everything about nature, not only wildlife, but the entire way it works. I spend most of my time in nature, and in my spare time, when I'm not hunting, I'm fishing, or I'm making drawings, or I'm taking pictures, or I'm writing about nature. My life is nature, and most of the hunters I know are very, very deeply submerged into nature.
I'd like to go back to the question that I asked around whether you love these animals or whether there's any feeling of remorse as you shoot them. Many anti-hunters find it very hard when someone who hunts animals says they love them. I guess majority of the public might come or rather approach this from a point of just seeing the animals that we've grown up seeing on documentaries on BBC Earth and National Geographic, and then someone comes and shoots them. Do you see where the general public really is coming from with all these, if I could call them, quite negative comments that I see on social media when a photo is shared?
Absolutely. Today I have had a death threat, a very graphic one on Twitter actually. So of course I see non-hunters being shocked by the idea that somebody like me, like all hunters, like all fishermen, enjoys an activity that includes killing of animals. I can understand that. And I think the issue here is that modern people has been very much removed from nature. When you're saying it's difficult to understand how a hunter can love wildlife, I could just respond very easily saying it's difficult to understand why every meat eater in the world doesn't hate cows or hate chicken, because you don't eat meat because you hate cows or you hate chickens. You eat meat because you like to eat meat.
Jens, I hope you aren't comparing oranges and apples here.
No, I'm not really, because you know nothing about the steak that you buy in the supermarket. That might have been a poor cow that was beaten all his life, lived in a dirty stable, and had a terrible experience being slaughtered in an abattoir. You know nothing about that.
Let me also just take more of a neutral position as well as I ask this question to HSI and Dr. Matthew. Dr. Matthew, some liberalists say that we are losing more wildlife from other threats at even a faster rate than what we are calling hunting safaris. One of the biggest threats is the lack of enough land for large populations of people. Large populations are eating up a lot of habitats, especially on the African continent. But then you also have these populations of wildlife also multiplying, and they need land to exist. So you're talking about things to do with carrying capacity. But also you have another challenge, which is the case of communities in a continuous battle with wildlife. Wildlife getting onto the farms of communities, wildlife attacking family members, relatives, and there seems to be human-wildlife conflict all across the continent. And if you did ask the Uganda Wildlife Authority, that is actually one of their biggest challenges to conservation. But you also have in some other parts of the world where you have animals just dying of natural causes. You're losing all those animals for free. There is no money that is coming in. Yet you've got someone who is saying, someone like Jens, who is saying, okay, let me just use the example of $750,000 in exchange for just shooting a few animals. And they say you can use this money in your anti-poaching campaigns, in your patrols. What would you be your response to a discussion like that where people say, can't we sacrifice a few in exchange of conserving the bigger herd?
Thanks. So I think one of the things we need to understand, and you're right, ecosystems, these wildlife ecosystems, they need balance, but they also need flux. They need a change and of individual animals, and that happens through natural routes like dispersals and natural deaths. Okay, whether that's through predation or dying because of a lack of some water in the area, these deaths are natural. However, we're living in a world with a growing human population, and that's constantly consuming more and more physical space and demanding more resources. This is reducing the available natural habitat for these wild species. However, this doesn't mean that we should resort to a bullet to control these kind of problems. Wildlife shouldn't be seen as a panicker for these social economic issues. It's not a quick fix. These are short-term solutions that the trophy hunting industry is bringing. Killing and selling animals supports and encourages a trade industry around these animals, an illegal wildlife trade industry that builds up around these industries. And this further exacerbates the problem. What we need is smart, innovative conservation management, that can bring these patchwork of ecosystems together for the wild species.
Now, there's a whole lot more where that came from. The full episode goes live this Sunday, the 12th of Feb, right here on the Jonathan Benaya podcast. As we already said, the podcast is now available on all major streaming platforms, including Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio for those tuning in the US. It's also available on TuneIn, Pandora, Castbox, Deezer, and several other platforms. All right, I guess we'll have to meet on Sunday.
Baba.